I want to welcome everybody to the Vantage Point 3 podcast on finishing well. And our hope today is to help you as facilitators think about finishing well personally, think about finishing well with your group, and think about finishing well as a church as a whole, perhaps. And my name's Pam Edwards, and I'm on the Vantage Point 3 team. And I have two guests and friends with me today. And Joe, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Meg.
My name is Joe Borman, and I live north of Chicago, about 1 hour, and have been part of Vantage Point for about 13 years, led a number of groups, and I'm in a group right now. It is a joy of my life to be part of the Vantage Point 3 process with other people.
Hi, I'm Meg Kempton. I am in Detroit, Michigan, and our church is Grace Community Church, and I coordinate the Vantage Point processes for our church, and we have been connected with Vantage Point 3 for at least 13 years. And like Joe, I'm very committed to the processes. I've seen people's lives changed, and just very excited about all three of the processes through VP3.
Well, let me just jump in with thinking about your groups and the individuals sitting around the table. When you think about what finishing well for them might look like, I'm just wondering what comes to mind for you.
Well, I think of the journey process a little bit like I use the analogy of a rocket ship taking off into space. And the first few weeks, you're like leaving the launch pad. But by the time you get to the narrative, you're in beautiful outer space. And then Strength Finders, you're in beautiful outer space. I mean, that's a real crescendo. But to me, the most important part is when the shuttle comes home, that it lands well, that it re-enters the atmosphere and doesn't burn up, as we learned with Challenger. So in many ways, I see the most important phase of the whole journey year, how it finishes. And yeah, so we were just talking about it, and my group meets on Wednesday mornings, and we looked ahead to the date in May that's going to be our final date. I announced it today, talked about the importance of everybody being there, because we would shift the day if they couldn't be. And I want them to know in advance that that's going to be a very good time for them to be present. I think I get more excited about what happens in that finishing meeting than I do about any other aspect of Vantage Point 3.
Meg, what comes top of mind for you?
Well, many things, but I guess what I was thinking of most is that paying attention to the process along the way, having a pulse of the group, I think is an important part of finishing well. And what I mean by that is what I've learned over the years. I've probably led maybe a dozen journey groups. And what I've learned is that you have to pay attention to what's going on in the group as you're moving through the process if you want to finish well. So for instance, the journey group that I'm in right now, they're all different, but it's a very different group from any of the other groups. It's a very quiet group, which is not the normal for us to have a journey group. So we have been more intentional this time to have hangout times, outside of the group, so that there's bonding taking place. I think that's an important part of having a healthy group, that there's trust in the group, and that happens, I think, through relationship and getting to know one another. And sometimes that has to be beyond the discussion that surrounds the homework. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a few things that we do to finish, to celebrate. I don't know if you want me to go into detail now. Okay. So I agree with Joe. I think that the narrative process is pivotal. I think that's where bonding takes place. That's where, trust buds, and takes root. So I think it's important after the narrative process to continue to celebrate what we're learning and what we know about each other. So there's a few things that we do. We do a retreat experience at the end of Journey, and we call it High Adventure Camp. And we're in the city, so we drive 3 hours from the city. We go to the same camp every year. We're there for a weekend. We do high ropes, we do low ropes, we have worship time together, we have devotions together, we hang out, we laugh, we play board games. And probably the culmination of the year for us is two things. At the Adventure Camp on Sunday, we have our own service, our own Sunday service. It's definitely more casual than you would go to at a church. And part of that is we take communion with one another and we wash one another's feet. And that usually really solidifies just that deeper experience we've had with God along the way throughout the journey process, those deepening relationships with one another. And then when we get home, we have that meeting that you were talking about, Joe. We have that final celebration, and that's when we share the blessings that we've written for one another. And so everyone brings a blessing for every other person in the group written down, and it's fun. Some people make handmade cards and they have them in fancy envelopes, and some people, write on the back of a receipt or something. So it's great. Everybody's personality shines through, and we have this experience. And everyone reads their blessing out loud to every person in the group. And yes, it takes time to do this, but it's just so meaningful, and it's just a really powerful time. And then, of course, I don't know about everybody else, but in Michigan, we eat a lot. So at all the celebrations, we're always eating. There's always lots of food. I feel like that was a lot of words, but I'm just excited about, the process and how we do celebrate and try to end well.
And Joe, I've heard you tell about kind of the unique way that you try to notice and honor people in the groups that you've had.
So we also have a meal. I wouldn't think about that final session without a good meal. And we don't call them a blessing. We call them affirmations. They might be the same thing. I don't know. But we each write out on any kind of medium what we've seen in the other person, and what we appreciate about them, how we believe that God is part of their journey, even how we have felt taking this journey with them. So we affirm, and every time that seems very powerful, because a lot of people will go through a week, a month, a year, and never have anybody affirm them for anything. So to have group members doing that one by one, I mean, it lifts up not just your day, but maybe the whole season. And then something I learned from friends who had been through Journey before me, we started doing, and I do it every time, during the year, especially during the narrative time, I keep notes of little incidental things that were symbolic of a person's journey or something that they've shared during the year. And then I go out and I purchase that item at a flea market or a dollar store or somewhere, and I give it as a gift to each of them, and I talk about the significance of it. An example, we had a woman in one of our groups that she had been on pastoral staff, her husband had, and so they moved around a lot. And because they moved a lot, they never planted a tree because they were never there long enough to see the tree grow. And so I went to Home Depot by us, and for her, I bought a tree. And it's like $30 or $40. But when you bring one of those into your living room and give it to a person, it looks like it's bigger than it did in the parking lot of Home Depot. That was hers. For another person, I'm thinking of a woman who part of her story was a roller skate and a roller skate key. I won't go into why that was real significant in her story. But that night I gave her a roller skate with the key. And it just, these were reminders of something that had been a major part in their story. And it was a way to further affirm them with something they could take home and keep. And I found out through the years, as I visited in some of their homes, there are a lot of them that actually put those items on a shelf and planted the tree in the backyard, and it's actually growing. And that's been a fun thing. With a budget of probably no more than $100, you could do the whole group.
That's cool.
In the group that I led, one of the groups I led, I think because I recognition that everybody around the table, that particular journey group was really learners. I chose a book for each of them with a handwritten note, that I thought was just like the right book for them to read the summer following, that would help them take the next steps that it seemed like God was prompting them to take. And it really seemed like over the last couple of months when I sort of got that idea in my mind, that God was just whispering to me like, oh yeah, that for Jeff, that'd be perfect. And so I really had a lot of enthusiasm for each one that they received, So I think that personalizing, just what you see in them as their facilitator in honoring that is a beautiful thing too.
So Pam, you were just, as the year rolled on, you were just making a little note to remind yourself of that later, right?
Right, because I'd have to hold on to it,
Yes.
Yeah. I remember asking a group, I think I always did this, and you tell me how you handle this. I remember at some point, maybe after the narratives, maybe a little bit into stage 3, saying, kind of naming when we were going to be ending, and then asking the group individually, together but individually, so, how you feel about this deal coming to a close, in this fashion. And inviting people to be honest about that. And what was always interesting is about, if you had a group of 8, 2 or 3 that were really, really bummed that this was going to be ending, like really sad. And then 2 or 3 that were like, God's got things going and I've got other things to do and this has been great. And then there's people in the middle that kind of felt some of both. And I wondered how you guys are navigating that, or what you think would be good counsel, especially for the 2 or 3 or 4 who are bummed out that this is going to be ending. What can you say to folks about that?
Well, I would say, first of all, as a facilitator, don't overpromise something you can't deliver. Early on in the first or second group, I forget where it was, I would say, but we don't have to stop getting together. We can get together as a group after this thing's over. And maybe it happened, maybe it never happened. So, life goes on and your busyness as a facilitator goes on. And if you're going to keep facilitating, a few months later, you probably have another group. So I would encourage, don't promise something that you really can't deliver. So I'd start there. And then positively, I would say, it's a great place to introduce, it doesn't have to end. There's a year or two. If you're facilitating the, way of life, it's a natural time to encourage them to come on with you or hand them off to somebody else. But some people, I'm thinking of just a few in my mind right now, they have almost become like Vantage Point 3 junkies, in the sense that too dependent on being in the process to make it work for them privately when it's all over. I mean, at most you go through 3 years, and if they don't facilitate a group themselves, sooner or later that's done. And hopefully along the way, they've learned how to be self-feeding,
Mm-hmm.
but some haven't. And that's hard to watch. That's hard to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Meg, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I agree. You've had that situation in groups. There's usually someone who's going to be heartbroken, that the group is coming to a close, and you can usually see it coming through a person's story. I think when you get to know the person better, you can get a better handle on why maybe the end might be more traumatic for them than perhaps other people in the group. So, maybe trying to address that personally. And, I agree with Joe saying, making it clear really from the beginning that we are for sure together for this season of time. We don't know what time after that holds, but being clear about that. And for the person, it might be more traumatic, for reminding them that they can continue with their mentor. They have their mentor, and that it's a possibility that relationship can continue after the process. And again, just as Joe said, there's year 2, a way of life, and we're always, encouraging people to move on to the second year, and many have. And for some people, it's just, as Joe said, it's more difficult. It's more difficult to move on, and easing that. And, being in multiple journey groups, some of our groups were better about getting together for those social times and those hangouts. And, for other groups, it hasn't happened, or it, faded over time, which sometimes I think is just the natural thing that is supposed to happen. So just being sensitive to that, and, staying on the journey with them.
May you have be thinking about continuing on with your mentor. We've never done that. And I have to give that some serious thought. Up to now, we've always said we don't want mentors to continue on because we don't want them to feel like they're forever tied to this person. There needs to be a beginning and an end. And but what you say makes sense. So I've really got to think through that.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Just
and
for 6 months or something doesn't mean they're done.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's also one of the topics we talk about in the journey group. That's part of ending well. As we say, make sure that you're ending well with your mentor relationship. So you want to make sure you have that intentional conversation about whether or not you're going to continue. If not, buy your mentor lunch, thank them, thank them for being on the road with you. And if you are going to continue, map a course. What is that going to look like? And we've had a number of people who they've been with their mentors for 5 years and more. And it's not twice a month. It usually transforms into a once a month or maybe once every other month. But we have had multiple relationships continue after the journey.
I love hearing that. That helped me, what you just shared.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love I'm going to encourage each of my people to do something for that mentor for all the times that you've been together for coffee or whatever. Give them a gift card or something, at least a handwritten note to thank them. That's very good.
What about for you guys, for your own soul? What has finishing well personally? What's that? What have you found yourself thinking or doing or talking with God about?
Well, honestly, by the time I'm at the end of journey, I'm thinking about the next journey, the recruiting I need to start doing for the next year's groups. Let's see, I guess ending well for me is just being a good steward with those relationships, making sure that I'm attentive to the people who have been in my group. One, as coordinator of all the groups for our church, one thing I do at the end of the processes is I send everyone an email. So whether they're in year 1, year 2, or year 3, and I offer to meet with them individually in case they have any feedback, or have any concerns, or if they just want to share something about their experience. So I think making myself available is one of the ways I try to finish well for the groups. Personally, for me, after a year of leading, I need some margin in the summer. So what I do is I really don't commit to anything for the summer, so that I can be fresh, in the fall for the next group. And just being in the process along the way with the group. Sometimes because I'm so familiar with the material, I'll get lazy and I'll, not prepare as much as I should. And I don't think that's good for my soul, for my heart. I need to be present in the process. And so I need to be doing the journey every time with the group.
That's awesome. That's
Meg is a lot more warm-hearted than I am. I've done 7 months. I'm ready to be disconnected for a while. So there is a dynamic that happens when you're also a leader in the church as well as a facilitator. And a few people have felt like, now I'm going to be Pastor Joe's best friend and we're going to do social things together and do life together. And you can't, most people, their slots are all filled up. And so sometimes that's been challenging to disappoint people that they're not going to be continuing on a lot closer with me one-on-one than maybe they hoped. I don't know if the process of VP3 lifts that expectation or not, but there have been a few times I've needed to dispel that, and that's been uncomfortable. I mean, you've been meeting with these people every week. So even though the group's not going to meet anymore, what do you do with people that want to still be meeting with you one-on-one, if not every week, every other week? And most of the time we don't have that luxury. That's hard.
Yeah, you're raising really good points. I think I've always felt a little guilty.
Yeah.
Personally, that I was having the feelings of needing the margin, needing the break, kind of wrapping this up and starting to think about what's next. I always kind of had tension related to that, but it also, seemed like that was the, that was the spirit, the movement that was in taking place as well too. So I think there is some wrestling for us as we seek to care and lead and look ahead all at the same time.
So Megan's had 13 groups. Imagine if she was trying to keep up one-on-one with all those people. I mean, it's just impossible. But what is possible, I think, if you're in a church or some other organizational setting that you're going to be staying in, like in a church, whenever I see people at church or in some other setting in the building that I've been through VP3 with, there's always a spirit of camaraderie. We've been on a journey together. I mean, those hugs and those handshakes and those smiles are always at a deeper level than people that I've never been on the journey with. So that remains. Definitely.
So Joe, do you meet with the people in your journey group individually throughout the process?
Yeah, so my wife and I just met with one of the women in our group today. This is my wife's push more than it's mine, but her expectation is that we need to have one-on-one with each person in some kind of setting outside, of the room that we meet in for group. So usually it's out for coffee or a meal or something. You do that too, Megan? Or?
Well, I certainly have done that with some people. I can't say that I've met with everyone one-on-one that I've had in the journey groups, but I think that's great.
Mhm. When I was sitting in a chair at the local church, leading adult, kind of the point person for adult ministry, I loved and I had more capacity, I think. I loved, for those who are interested, if you wanted to meet one-on-one kind of toward the end of the journey process or after we've wrapped up, to talk more specifically about what your next steps in serving or leadership or what God seemed to be stirring, and just kind of, I don't know, talk that over or think that through more specifically, I welcomed that, and I felt like it helped people get traction. Um, so so that's something to think about too. Um, Not everyone who leads one of our journey groups is in that kind of a seat, but a lot of facilitators are. So let me transition to, if particularly for those as ministry leaders, when you think about what's next and finishing well, what comes to mind in the kind of the organizational gamut? Joe, I'll go to you first.
Okay. Well, I'm in a little bit of an awkward stage right now. I had been leading the process in our church setting, and I retired a couple of years ago, still part of the church, but someone else is in charge of the process. So it's a little bit dependent on what others do in terms of making space for more Vantage Point 3 groups, year 1, 2, or 3. But to the degree that those are available, I always encourage people to go on to at least a way of life, to take the next step. I think I don't know that just 1 year of being together ingrains right habits enough to last. But hopefully after a second year of walking with this process, good things are there. I also, warn would be a wrong word, but I share with people that, for 7 months now, or however long it is, you have found 5 hours a week or more out of your schedule to be with God and others. You've done your homework, and you've met with a mentor, and you've come to a group setting. And it's sort of like putting your arm in a bucket of water. When you put it in, the water makes way for your arm. But when you take your arm out, it's as if it was never there. The water rushes back, right? And life can do that, and our schedules can do that. And all of a sudden, we're back to where we were in terms of pace of life and, non-relationships and all of that. I encourage them to keep that kind of space there, so that all the good things that have happened this year don't just evaporate and go away.
That's good. I'm not certain if I'm answering your question correctly, Pam, but so as a church, we have a discipleship ministry. And because of the changed lives we've seen over the years through the Vantage Point processes, the Vantage Point processes are a locked in part of our discipleship process at our church. So that makes my job easier as the coordinator. The elders, everyone here, everyone backs it up. A large portion of our leadership has done the journey, and like at my church, it's easy. I have total buy-in on the VP3 processes. So which it just, the fruit is there, right? So I don't know that as church-wide, we necessarily do anything to end well. I think there's some sensitivity there because at our church, the Vantage Point processes are invitational. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily something that we're putting out there church-wide, if you know what I mean, to because in order to be in the VP3 processes, you've had to have demonstrated some faithfulness to commitments. So you've needed to have been in a small group. You need to have been in a Bible study previously or something like that. So it's not necessarily something we advertise church-wide, but it is part of the foundational discipleship program in our church, with no exceptions. So in fact, could I just read you a text? Pam, I was telling you that last night in our journey group, our first couple started the narrative process. And of course, the youngest couple in the group, 2 millennials, stepped up to the plate and shared their narratives. And Deja, the woman, she's just sent me a text. She said, "Last night was a great experience. I'd suggest Journey to people off narrative experience alone. I'll probably thank you at the end again, but thank you for inviting us." So there you have it. She gave her narrative 18 hours ago. And
Meg, I've never been to your church, and I have no clue as to where it is. But I want to say that if I moved into your area, based on what you just told me of the process being just a part of the foundation of your church, I would go there just for that, because it tells me a lot about your church. Just like I know there's some parents that drive around when they're replanted in another part of the country and they look like for a church that has Awana or a church that has Sunday school or, different things people look for. Knowing what I know about Vantage Point 3, I would go probably to VP3 headquarters and say, "Here's where I'm living. Tell me the closest church as this is a part," because that tells me a ton about that church. So it's good for me to hear what you just said. And any pastors or leaders in churches that might hear what we're just talking about, you might watch this later. I want to say to any pastor or church leaders out there, jump in and make this part of the foundation of your church. You will never be sorry for that.
Yep.
Right, Meg? I mean, it's a big piece of the discipleship. Holistic, transformational, all the things you want to see.
Pastors will say that given the variety of things they're responsible for, that getting to lead a journey group puts the fuel in their tank for all of the other things that they are required to do because of the action of God that they get a front row seat to see.
Yes.
Well, a couple of things just by way of kind of adding on here a bit. There are churches who do celebrate kind of publicly at the end of the year. A church in Iowa does something every May. They've been doing it for years, for about a decade, called Stories from the Seats. And Orchard Hill Church in Cedar Falls, Iowa, you can even go to their website and hear some of their stories. But they choose a few of the narratives and work alongside the particular participant with their agreement to share their narrative modified for the full congregation and share their story. And it is the most listened to sermons or worship services of their whole year. And then that sort of subtly and not so subtly casts a vision of what's possible if others want that kind of experience. So they kind of begin to lay the groundwork of the recruiting and invitation of other people who may want to be a part of something like this in the fall. So that's kind of a finishing well for the church as a whole, which we hear about and sounds so meaningful. And I've listened to many of those and they're fantastic. Another thing I would just say for those of you who are listening is that one of the real beauties of the Vantage Point 3 processes and the journey in particular is the versatility of it for you as a facilitator and for your setting. So as you think about how to finish well in all of the different categories we've talked about, trust yourself to do and lead and choose things that fit you and fit your group, versus feeling like you have to follow any kind of prescription that you may have heard from us that sounds ever so good, but may just not be, it just may not fit for you. Just trust that you know your people in your group, and create, a sense of finishing well that's meaningful for you. One of the things we hear from groups is that they are surprised at the end by how much this group of this community has meant to their own transformation, to their own development. And so as you look toward finishing well, just continue to celebrate the sense of how God uses other people's voices to speak into our lives in a beautiful way. And then for the comments that Meg and Joe made about, maybe the next step is going on to a way of life, particularly for the journey participants, I just wanted to tip everybody off that we're doing something new we've never done before. We're going, because there is a bit of momentum moving in the journey group and thinking about what's next, on April 12th, we are offering a early bird online express preview and training for the way of life processes. So if there's somebody in your group that would want to lead a way of life, if you're thinking about maybe I want to lead a way of life, but I don't really know what it is, for only $100 in this early bird 2-hour experience, you can get the overview of the process and kind of assess whether or not it's the right next step for you. So you can go onto the Vantage Point 3 website and look for registrations and get the information to register for that, or contact us, pam@vantagepoint3.org or kay@vantagepoint3.org. So I want to thank my friends Meg and Joe for being with me today. Gosh, there's lots more we could say, but from all of us here at the team, we just want to applaud what you're doing with your groups and ask that God's Spirit might just be rich and thick and generous with you as you finish well. Bye-bye.